Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on what is the credit card class action settlement. What does it mean to your business? We're just going to wait as people come into the webinar over the course of the next minute or two, but I wanted to welcome you all. My name is Corinne Pullman. I'm the Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships. Some of you who may have come to our webinars before may recognize me. I am also here in place of Laura Jones, who usually takes on this role, but who is on a well-deserved vacation this week, for those of you who know, of course, of our team that tends to put on these. And those of you that are new, welcome. As we have just put into the chat at the bottom is a copy of the presentation that if you'd like to follow along, you're more than welcome to download it from there and take a look at it, but we will be obviously walking through it over the course of the next hour. Just a couple of quick housekeeping to let you know that you have both a chat and a Q&A at the bottom. We would really like it if you could put your questions in the Q&A so that we can keep better track of them. You're also welcome to vote up questions as we go through the course of the webinar, and we'll certainly do everything we can to answer as many questions as we can. So that's something that we encourage you to do. Before we get started, though, I'd love to find out where everybody is from. So if you want to throw into the chat where in the country you're joining us from today, that would be super helpful and give us a sense, and our guests a sense of where folks are coming from across the country. I'm actually based in Ottawa, and so let us know where it is that you're coming from by just throwing it into the chat at the bottom. All right, moving to the next slide. So as I said, these are our presenters today. My name is, as I said, Corinne Pullman, Senior Vice President, National Affairs and Partnerships. So I oversee sort of our legislative work in Ottawa. I'm joined today by Jocelyn Rindress, who's our Senior Manager, Business Resources for the National and Atlantic, as well as Rachel Eng, our Manager of Member Information and Escalations, as well as our special guest, Luciana Brazil, who is from the Branch McMaster law firm that obviously was the lead sort of on this particular case. We'll have a lot to talk about today. Oh, here we go. We're starting to get some folks signing in, so that's great to see. BC, Nova Scotia, Prince Rupert, Kelowna, lots of folks in BC here today. That's awesome. As well as folks from Ontario, Petawawa, Aurora, Delta, wonderful. So great to see so many folks joining us today from right across the country. Thanks for doing that. And also many questions have already started to enter into the Q&A. So we'll be getting to those in just a moment. So next slide, please. We haven't done this in a while, and for those of you who have been to some of our webinars knows that sometimes we like to sort of talk a little bit about quotes or cartoons or sort of get the mood going a little bit. And these are just some of the ones we've actually used a couple of these before during some of our more difficult times of COVID, but I think there's still some really good messages in here. And one of my favorites is about, courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is a quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I'll try again tomorrow. I thought that's such a touching and great quote that really helps me think about what it is that you need to do to get through day to day. While we may be a little bit further along in the pandemic, we're still all having some pretty challenging times around us. So just wanted to make sure that folks had a chance to sort of reflect a bit on some of these quotes as well. All right, move on to the next slide, a bit of the agenda. So we'll talk a little bit about, we do want to just take a few minutes to talk a little bit about some new things that are happening at the federal level that may impact you, may be of interest to you before we jump into the meat of today. It'll just take 2 or 3 minutes. But then we're going to have a bit of a conversation with Luciana Brazil and about the lawsuit and what it's about and what the context is and why it happened. We'll then get into some details of what you need to do to access the settlement and what the surcharging is all about, and then we'll get to your questions. So that's sort of the run of the show today. So on to the next slide. I'm going to bring up my colleague, Rachel. I think you're going to take this one over, and Rachel's going to walk through a couple of other quick things we wanted to sort of touch on before we moved into the main bulk of today's webinar.
Thanks, Corinne. Yeah, I think one thing that we wanted to mention in terms of what's new is that rapid testing for COVID-19 screening in the workplace programs will actually end later this year. So essentially the federal programs who have been providing you with some free test kits may start ending those programs. So I know some BR advisors have been saying, you know, stock up a little bit now. I don't know if we want to create that kind of craze, but then afterwards, pharmacies may charge up to $14 per kit. So keep that in mind. Yeah, next slide, please. So how to get access to those kits, it's essentially an online intake form, and then you choose the provider that and that can be a pharmacy. And then once you complete your registration, they should send it to you. At the start of COVID, we heard that these were getting sent out pretty slowly. But now it seems, or let us know if you hear otherwise, but it seems like things have been going pretty smoothly. And there's just a list of a few things that you would need in order to receive those kits. Yeah, next slide, please. Awesome. Another thing that we thought you should know, a lot of us have been hearing on the phone lines that you want to help with the Ukraine situation. So the government of Canada actually made a portal that provides options to donate financial aid, provide job offers to displaced Ukrainians, donate medical supplies, or donate temporary housing, transportations, or goods of service. So feel free to click on that link and visit the portal to see if you can help out a little bit more. If you have any questions, we've sent in, or we have there on the screen, the email that you can send all of your questions to. Next slide, please. And I will pass it back to Corinne.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Again, just a couple of things we thought was important for you to be aware of before we jump into the meat of today. And Luciana has joined us here, and I wanted to introduce Luciana before we start. We're going to have a bit of a conversation about the context, but Luciana Basile is a partner at Branch McMaster and the lead of its class action practice. She was born and raised in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and has both civil and common law legal qualifications with a Bachelor of Civil Law degree obtained from the Mackenzie University in '93 and a Bachelor of Law degree obtained in '98 from the University of Victoria in British Columbia. She's appeared before all levels of court, including the Supreme Court of Canada. In addition, Luciana's national practice has required appearances before courts in other jurisdictions, including Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Quebec, Ontario, and New York. She speaks Portuguese fluently, as I would suspect anybody who grew up in Sao Paulo, Brazil would, and maintains a membership still in the Brazilian Bar Association. She has a lifelong passion for equestrian pursuits and volunteers with STARS, which is a therapeutic riding society, so that must be really interesting. And she shares her Vancouver home with her family and her Rhodesian Ridgebacks, which I understand may occasionally be barking as we go through this process, but hopefully we'll stay quiet for the bulk of the webinar. So thank you for joining us, Luciana. I think it's really important to have this conversation about
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into it. Why was this class action lawsuit launched in the first place?
Well, we started this case in late 2010 and early 2011, and we did that first in Quebec, but then given the way the structure of class actions is in Canada, we had to file in other jurisdictions. So we filed claims in Alberta, Ontario, BC, and Saskatchewan as well. And with that, we got national coverage. So once we had all these claims filed, we were acting on behalf of all Canadian merchants all the way across Canada. And I think when we had the introductions, we had people from PEI. So, all the way across the coast were included in our claim. And we started this case because of interchange fees, which I expect that most of the people attending this seminar are aware of. But it is about 80% of the fees that are charged under merchant discount fees that are charged to merchants in order to accept Visa and MasterCard credit cards. And because Visa and MasterCard were originally an association of banks, they weren't independent entities in the beginning of this. We thought that it was problematic that the banks had gotten together and had agreed that they were going to set up this structure and charge these amounts from merchants. And the problem is that, as most people know, the higher level the card is, the more benefits it offers the card holder, the more expensive the interchange fees are. So there's a correspondence there between the cost that merchants pay to accept that card and the benefits that the banks give to the card holders in order to entice them to take that card. And then there is, in addition to that, there is a number of rules that merchants had to follow to accept credit cards. So if one of them is, if they accept a Visa card, they have to accept all Visa cards. They can't, for example, just choose to accept the basic Visa and say, you know, the super high duper premium card, I don't want to accept that one. So if they choose to accept one, they have to accept all. And what that, and also the other important rule is that they were not allowed to surcharge. So they're not allowed to say, customer, I know that you're trying to pay with your card, and I see in your wallet you have 3 different types of Visa. They have different fee structures. And if you pay with this one, will be a certain price. But if you pay with that one, will be price plus whatever. Merchants were not allowed to surcharge. So what that did is the consumer who made the choice of what payment method I want to use, for them, the cost was the same. And the only differentiating factor for the consumer were the benefits that they received for using the cards. And they got more benefits with the higher premium cards that had the greatest cost that merchants had to pay. So in our view, what that did is it created the inverse of a competitive market, because the person that made the election about the payment method was encouraged not to go and look for the cheapest method, but to look for the most expensive method at the end of the day, because they were not allowed to see the real cost of acceptance of the cards. And that is in a nutshell, the genesis of the case and why it is that they were commenced.
So you said it started back in 2010, but was only settled, I think, in 2021. Why did it take so long for this to be
well, so you touched on a couple of good points there. So first off is that there's not just one settlement, right? I think you're referring to the last settlement that cleaned up the totality of the case against the 5 remaining defendants on the case. But we started having smaller settlements as early as 2013 with the smaller players. And then, so what we're doing now is we're taking all of the settlement benefits that were collected all through all of the settlements that were court approved. Each settlement had to be court approved. And we're now distributing those settlements to the class members. But to answer the question of why so long, well, you know, I think the answer to that is that litigation is a lot slower in real life than it appears on television and on books and shows and so forth. So this was industry challenging litigation. Like, we're taking a very profitable business operation and means that they had to recoup these costs of competing for the card holders. And we were saying you can't do that. Right. And that was defended tooth and nail. Every single step of the way, we had to litigate aggressively. So that takes a lot of time.
And so let's get to the meat of it. So what does this all actually mean now for merchants in Canada?
So going back to sort of what I was saying, which is the fact that there have been a number of settlements. If you take all of those settlements together and you see what is the net position of the merchants now, as opposed to compared to where they were before, I think we have 3 key benefits at the end of the day. The first one is that we have managed to collect some money from the banks and the networks, and we're now in a position to distribute approximately $131 million to Canadian merchants. And there's a claims process underway, and we're going to touch on that shortly, but there is a deadline for doing that. And I think I wrote it down. It is September 30, 2022, the deadline for that. So don't miss that, very important. But that is the first of the benefits. The second of the benefits is that this issue of surcharging. So there's going to be one of the benefits that we negotiated with the Visa and MasterCard around the settlements, because they're now independent organizations and now they get to be the ones who set the rules, and they are now the ones who say you can't surcharge, is we managed to get an exemption against this no surcharge rule. And that's going to become effective in October of this year. And there's a bunch of rules and laws and caps and and things associated with that. But the net result is that merchants who do want to surcharge will be permitted to doing that within those limits. And that's going to provide a means on a go forward basis to defray some of those interchange costs. And the last key point and benefit for merchants is that even if there are a lot of merchants who choose not to surcharge, and there are people who do choose that, Visa and MasterCard don't know what your breaking point is. They don't know at what point in time you're going to say, you know what, this is just ridiculous at this point. And I know I didn't want to surcharge, but this is crazy, right? They don't know what your breaking point is. And so the threat of potentially there being a lot of merchants who say, I'm going to surcharge, is going to hopefully keep the further escalation of those charges at bay. And so that's the third key benefit.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one because, well, there's two things about surcharging. One, I agree that there's the transparency that comes with it, so that I think the customers don't always realize that the merchant is paying a fee, and now this could potentially be more upfront, again, if you choose to eventually surcharge as well. But secondly, it gives that power a little bit back to the merchant. And I think that's been an important element of all of this. So for that, I think it's a really good step forward in bringing that power back a little bit more to the merchant side of the equation. So interestingly, now we've gotten through this point, does it actually mean that merchants won here, or is it like, what's the?
Well, we like to think so, but officially there is no win and there's also no loss, because this wasn't a determination by the courts on the merits. This was all part of negotiated settlements and compromises and no admissions of liability and yada, 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 right? So I can't say officially that this was a win, but I also, nobody should say that it was a loss. But I think at the end of the day, merchants are definitely better off now than they were before, because they're now having access to some monetary benefits. They're having access to a means to defray their ongoing costs of that. And they're also given a really valuable opportunity to educate the consumers and to educate Visa and MasterCard as well about what they tolerate and what they don't tolerate, right? And I think it's important to note that the Commissioner of Competition had taken aim at this issue, and they had started proceedings against the networks. But those proceedings were dismissed in 2013 because of a technicality in terms of how they pleaded a case and what the basis of the issue was. So I think when you're asking me, is this a win? I'd say, yeah, because we achieved something that the Commissioner of Competition wasn't able to do. So I feel very happy with where we ended, and I think this definitely counts as a victory for merchants.
Yeah, it's great news, and I think it's something that we want to get into a bit of the details of, and we are going to go through some of the details for everybody on the webinar in just a second. But I think just generally from your perspective, because you did talk about this earlier, but I just want to reiterate it again, because the class action lawsuit was sort of I get dealt with in about 5 or 6 provinces, but it does mean it's applicable to everybody, every merchant across the country, correct?
Correct. Every merchant in Canada. There are some, so the only caveat to that is that if you are, I think in Quebec, that there are some prohibitions against surcharging by way of provincial regulations. We can't contractually modify an existing law in your home province or jurisdiction, right? So that we can't get around. But to the extent that the only source of the prohibition was contractual, we have eliminated that. But merchants in Quebec are eligible to receive the monetary settlements under the benefit as well. So,
right. And for the benefit of any of our members who may be here from Quebec, we have already sent a letter to the Quebec government asking them to look at this rule and potentially change it so that merchants in Quebec can also benefit from surcharging if they so choose in the future. So one other question before we sort of move on to the next area is that's come up, and you know, we've talked about this as Visa and MasterCard, but it's already come up on the Q&A. It came up before is American Express. Mm-hmm. Are they included? And if they're not, why not?
They are not. And the reason why they're not included is because they are an independent, standalone organization that does everything itself. Whereas the only reason we were able to target Visa and MasterCard is because of their genesis as associations of banks who are supposed to be horizontal competitors, right? And so the theory of our case is that these horizontal competitors were not competing, but were really colluding to set up a price that applied to merchants. And because of that, we said we could have a case. Now, of course, you're touching on one of the key defenses of the case. They say after Visa and MasterCard became independent entities in 2006 and 2008, the bank said, nothing to do with us anymore. You have zero claim against us, right? Which was one of the other litigation risks that we had to face in this case.
Okay. And so when we say Amex is not included, that means obviously no settlement around that. And as far as you know, no ability to surcharge either. That would depend on the rules that Amex puts on their own merchants.
Yeah, so that depends on Amex, but here is the caveat. The Visa and MasterCard were very sensitive to the issue of competition with Amex, right? They are fierce competitors as between them. And so, to the extent that you're surcharging, you have to be able to also surcharge Amex in sort of a corresponding way. They wanted to make sure that you're not, singling them out.
Very good. Okay, so we're going to leave it there. We're going to go and bring up my colleagues, Rachel and Jocelyn, to walk you through a little bit more of the details of how to go after the settlement, what it means to be surcharging, and then we're going to come back and do a whole big Q&A with Luciana and the team here at CFIB. So over to you, Rachel and Jocelyn.
Hi, thank you guys for that. We are getting some great questions, and I just wanted to point out that we also got over almost 200 questions before the webinar even happened, and we're going to answer a lot of them in the next part of the webinar. You are going to get a copy of the deck. There's a link in the chat. You will get a copy of the deck afterwards, also a recording of the webinar. But we wanted to point out that CFIB has also created a website that you can visit. And this website, there's a screenshot on this on the screen, but there's also a link in the bottom. It talks about what is the eligibility to participate in this settlement. It talks about how you can actually make a claim, what the processes are. And then there's a frequently asked questions section that talks about the actual settlement and what monies you might be able to get, but also the surcharging part. And so that's a really great resource if you're looking for some additional support. And Rachel and I are going to go over what you might qualify for, how to actually apply, and then we'll talk a little bit about surcharging. So Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, please. Yeah, and not to mention that the credit card class action settlement has a website as well, and you can always call your BR advisor or their phone line as well if you need support. But yeah, could we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, you've heard there's money to be accessed, and one of the big questions we often get is who is eligible. So 3 points that are key here is, were you a merchant in Canada at any point between March 23rd, 2001 and September 2nd, 2021? And then did you accept Visa or MasterCard credit cards as payments for goods during those times? And did you incur any merchant discount fees, including interchange fees, of course, as was mentioned in those in the conversation with Luciana and Corinne? And where do you go to submit those forms is that link right there, the credit card class action settlement website, which we'll show you a little bit later. Jocelyn, did you want to jump in on what kind of documents are needed?
That was a big question too. Like, what do I need to be documented? And the other part of the question too was, well, how much am I going to get? How do I know what type of business I am? And we actually we're going to walk through an undocumented claim in a moment. So that information is on the slide, but we'll go over that in a minute. Very, very important. Check that deadline, September 30th. That's something you must make note of. But if we want to go to the next slide, there's actually 3 different sizes of merchants. This does not have to do with how many people work for you or what size of a business you take up. It has to do with your annual revenues. And if you are considered a small merchant, it basically means that your average annual revenue over the claim period. And Rachel, is the claim period that March 2001 to September 2021? So that whole time?
Yeah, exactly. So at least that's my understanding. And maybe we'll get Luciana to triple confirm. But yeah, the claim period was the March 23rd, 2001 to September 2nd, 2021 period.
Right. So if you fall in that category, you're going to be considered undocumented, meaning you don't have to provide a lot of paperwork, and you could get up to a maximum $30 per year that you accepted those fees. And the next level is the simplified one, which we suspect most of our members will fall into. Rachel, do you want to cover the media merchant?
Yeah, so actually, we think a lot of our members are probably going to fall into the undocumented claims, but we do actually still have quite a few that fall into the simplified, and that just means you might need to show a little bit more confirmation of the fact that you participated or the amount of revenues that you had over the claim period. Just because you are getting more money out of it. So, but it's totally worthwhile. Like the jump from $30 a year payout to $250 per year is pretty great. So why not? And then the next step, if you had average annual revenues over that time span of over 20 million, then you would do the simplified or documented claim, in which case you're more likely to get a lot more questions. Obviously, you're getting a lot more out of it. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Just because I've noticed in the questions, it's come up with quite a few times. What if a business has multiple merchant accounts? Can they make one claim or one per merchant account?
So yeah, maybe that's something to get Luciana back on, and maybe she can answer that as we set up the walkthrough.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll try to jump on when you need me to jump on. So one great resource for all these is we have an FAQ posted on the credit card settlements website. So I think we're going to provide some reference to where that is, and anyone can go and look at it, but it just happens to have an answer to that question. So a lot of what you are asking about is something that we already considered and have already posted questions. So each corporate entity may make one claim. So what happens is if your chain means that there are multiple stores that are owned under one umbrella of one corporation, then you submit a single claim and you add up the revenue for all of the stores and all of the interchange paid for the stores in order to be able to do your claim.
Great, thank you. So
I actually have the FAQ pulled up here, just so that everybody can see what the credit card class actions website looks like. And this is the home page where it gives you a good overview of what is going on, the deadline, of course, and how much you can receive. And then the FAQs as well that Luciana was talking about here, if you have any questions on that.
And we are at 18, Rachel, just to situate you, like that's the answer to that question. And just so everyone knows, there's a column for important dates on the right side of this page. I've already this morning reached out to the team and asked them to update, because the date to the claims deadline is on the FAQ and it's on the text of the website, but it should also, for ease of reference, should be added to the important dates, as should be all of the surcharging dates. So that's going to be updated.
Perfect.
great resource. So I think the next step, Rachel, we're actually going to walk through what the undocumented, unclaimed process looks like, because it's actually fairly simple. And the good news is that our business advisors also have these screenshots. So if you get stuck, we can walk you through that process as well. But I'll let you take it away, Rachel.
Sounds good. So as you can see, this is kind of the welcome page of the online claim form. In this particular case, we're going to assume that we have over that time span less than $5 million. So we're going to try doing an undocumented claim. And here it kind of clarifies, well, are you sure that you're a small merchant with average yearly revenues less than 5 million? And then it clarifies what a medium merchant and large merchant would be. So we'll click next. And this is where you kind of add your claimant name and current contact information. This is what the credit card class action team would use in order to get into contact with you. And of course, your merchant information as well. And then you would click next.
Rachel, let me just jump in one thing, and I hate to do this to you, but on the annual average revenue, just want to draw everyone's attention. There's a question on the FAQ on that, number 15. And to calculate the annual average revenue, you have to refer to all revenue sources, not just credit cards, but you should only count the years in which you accepted the Visa or MasterCard credit card. So those are the qualifiers on that.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to jump in whenever. Perfect. So yeah, and then when you would click next, you would get to this page where it says who is submitting this claim. A lot of us have received questions about, am I a related entity, a third party? If you are the owner of the business, then you would likely be the settlement class member. So you would select that radio button and then click next. Here you would just confirm your payment method. So ideally, you would probably request for this to be a direct deposit. I think there's $1 or $2 fee if you wanted to receive it as a check. So that is an option if you choose if you think that's the most convenient. You would have to upload a void check for the direct deposit route. But once all this information is completed, you would click next. And this is the page that a lot of us get questions about in terms of what is the attestation? What does that look like? And so this is the attestation page where, yes, you select the fact that you are a small merchant. You confirm the amount that you've been receiving in terms of revenues, average annual revenues over that class period. Which is exactly what we said a few times. And then here you would select all the years that you've actually been participating in paying those interchange fees, for example. And then here you would confirm whether you have received or have not received any money from this settlement class action lawsuit already. And then state whether you're comfortable being contacted. Likely you would want to if you want to get access to this money, and then state that the claim form is in fact true and correct to the best of your knowledge, and then explain or write down your city, province, and full name again, and then select the last box, just signing this declaration. So that's everything that this attestation really entails. And then you get a summary of everything that you've written down that you can print and then hit submit when you're done. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of a walkthrough of what that undocumented claim looks like.
Rachel, let me just jump in. I think this is excellent that you did that. This is really, really useful. And just want to note to everyone that we worked really, really hard in trying to come up with a claims process that was easy and as painless as possible to do that. Now, you always have to walk a line and provide some sort of checks to be able to protect the integrity of the fund, because if you made it too easy, you could have fraudulent claims that are really taking the money away from the merchants, right? So we wanted to have a process that was easy enough, but also protecting you and your fund, because we want to put every single cent in your pocket. That you don't have to use anybody to be able to help you to do that. You, of course, can choose to engage somebody else. And we know that there are organizations that are in the business of being form fillers that are reaching out to merchants and saying, hey, you can participate in this if you hire us, and we can do this for you. You do not need to do any of that. You can choose to do it, but you're giving part of the money to somebody else. And we would really like to see the merchants maximizing their recovery. So if anybody has a question on this that is not answerable on the Q&A and you're stumped and you don't know what to do, we're going to provide our contact information and you can contact us. We are your lawyers on this, and we want to make sure that we help everyone as best we can.
And that's a great thing to add. I think there's a couple of questions that came up before the webinar saying, Luciana, that do I have to pay a lawyer to do this? How much is this going to cost? Are we going to win? It's essentially already a done deal, right?
Yes, you already paid us, because as class action lawyers, we were paid a percentage based on the contingency arrangement that was court approved by the courts. So you have already paid us. We are your lawyers. We're here to serve you, and we're here to try to facilitate this.
Amazing. Maybe I'll bring my colleague Jocelyn and Corinne back, and we can kind of ask you a few more questions about surcharging, because I know you talked about it with Corinne. Are you able to kind of explain what surcharging is a little bit more to us?
Yeah, so the question, the surcharging really is changing the optics of the transaction and allowing the consumer who chooses what method of payment they're going to use to know that there are costs that are varying costs associated with the different methods of payment. Now, if they want to use their super duper ultra privileged card and get amazing benefits and perks and all of that, somebody is paying for that, right? And what this allows them to see is that there is a cost to all of that. It's not a free ride. And it allows merchants to ensure that the customers see that. Now, there's a whole process of educating the merchant that has to come with that, so that they don't think that this is a new made up charge by merchants that are trying to come up with a cash grab. All that is happening is merchants are finally able to allow the consumers to see these costs that had been kept hidden for so long. And so we have reached out to consumer protection and other organizations to give them a heads up of this, because if they get any complaints from the consumers, we want them to know that this is not some made up merchant made fee, but this is really like being able to finally show what the true costs are. So that is the big long answer to what is surcharging. And I lost track of your other part of your question. So if you can restate it.
Yeah, I think it was just more about explaining exactly where surcharging kind of came from, which I think you did earlier a bit. And so I think when can businesses kind of expect to surcharge in the future?
So the agreement with both Visa and MasterCard provides that it ought to be effective as of October 6, 2022. So later this year. Now, there are a number of hoops and hurdles that merchants will have to jump in order to be able to do that. And unfortunately, each of Visa and MasterCard set their own hoops and hurdles, and they're not necessarily the same. So you're going to have to be paying attention to those requirements and conditions and all of that. There's, for example, a requirement that you notify the network 30 days in advance. But of course, the system by which you have to do that, in the case of MasterCard, is not going to be up and running until September 6th, which is exactly 30 days prior. So if a merchant is keen on surcharging their MasterCards, they're going to have to be on the ball, and they're going to have to be ready on September 6th to fill out this notification process to be able to comply with the requirement. There are also rules in terms of disclosures to the consumer and what has to show up on the receipt, and what are the amounts. The merchant's going to have to elect if they're going to surcharge by brand, meaning they will surcharge all MasterCard or all Visas, or they will surcharge by product type, i.e. they're going to only surcharge the Visa Infinite Premium cards. And there are different rules in terms of what the amount can be and what are the maximums. So merchants who want to surcharge should all start reviewing the rules of Visa and MasterCard that they're putting in place. And I think you guys are going to be posting some information for them on that as well. and they're well advised to start thinking about what they're going to have to do, connect with their acquirer, their processor. Are they aware that this is happening? What are they doing to make it easier for you? So all of that has to happen.
Yeah, so we're going to have good information up on our website outlining the steps you need to take if it's something that you're interested in doing. I don't know if we want to go through the last slide, Rachel and Jocelyn, that does give a bit of that detail here of what we know so far. So I guess the one important point is you cannot surcharge yet. It's still not allowed technically. You still have to wait until October 6th, and you will have to register in advance. And not only with Visa and or MasterCard, or at least give 30 days notice, but also with your processor. That's the most important, is to make sure your processor is aware, because your processor will be the one that will likely be putting it onto the bill if you decide to surcharge, so that your customer can see that you're surcharging the amount that you're surcharging. So does somebody want to run through this fairly quickly, and then we can jump to the rest of the questions?
Sure. Yeah, so I think we've kind of already talked about what is surcharging and when you can surcharge. And as we've mentioned, you'll need to provide 30 days in advance of starting to surcharge to either or both Visa and or MasterCard. And you'll have to also both of them will have disclosure agreements likely. We foresee that you'll have to have some sort of posters or whatnot. So CFIB is also trying to develop some tools and resources for you to use to help you in that. But yeah, at the end of the day, you'll be able to choose whether you want to surcharge at the brand level, which would be, for example, surcharging on all MasterCard transactions or all Visa transactions or both, or at the product level, which would be, the selecting specific cards such as premium cards. And yeah, that would be up to you to decide. Next slide, please.
Just gonna, as you do that, mention a couple of things. We have a couple questions on the chat about, so offering a discount for cash is essentially the same as surcharging to the credit card companies. You can already offer a discount for cash now, but you weren't allowed to surcharge. So it's not quite the same from a credit card company point of view. But the other one for you, Luciana, is about someone is a little worried about, are we going to be at risk of getting whacked with higher charges from credit card companies if we choose to surcharge? So are they going to somehow be penalized because they're choosing to surcharge? My guess is no.
Yeah, I saw this question pop up on the chat, and I'm really glad that you picked up on that, because I thought this was an important question that deserves to be answered. And my dog is just starting to whine right now, so I'm just telling you guys. No, the answer to that is you shouldn't, because this is where their system of having a default, like it's too much work. There are hundreds of thousands of merchants across Canada. It's too much work to negotiate independent interchange fees with each of the merchants. So what happens is they set out these default interchange rules that apply on virtually every transaction, except perhaps the supremely large merchants of the world, like the Walmarts or the Amazons, might be able to negotiate an independent agreement with them because the volume is so large. But by and large, they don't negotiate independent with merchants, and they set up default rules. And because they set out those default interchange fees, the reality is that they shouldn't be penalizing one merchant for the other merchant that is surcharging, right? They're not going to individually target merchants and apply a higher fee for them. So that shouldn't happen.
No. And frankly, if it does, you need to let us know right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That is
definitely want to know about that. And I think there might be, now you caught me, I don't know whether there's something in the agreement that prevents an increase in the next 5 years or so, but there may be something in the agreements that protects against that. But I definitely want to hear from any of you if you got any form of intimidation, harassment, or anything about surcharging.
Yeah, and I think, Barbara, your point about default charges will go up for everyone, sort of like insurance rate after claims, is an interesting one, and one that we at CFIB will watch very closely. We're very, very hawkish around rates when it comes to what this credit card company is. So that is the kind of thing we'll watch quite closely, but there shouldn't be any.
And I should just add that I don't think that will happen, Corinne. And the reason it won't happen is because it has to happen for all, because they're not going to be individually doing. There are some large merchants who right now are not keen on surcharging, but if it starts going up, they're going to say, I have had enough. This is way too much of my eating too much of my profit. So I think that's going to, in a perverse way, their own structure default fees is going to keep that level.
Yeah. Okay, so on this slide, just to finish it up, is some of the other details around surcharging that you'll see there, as well as a link to MasterCard. It was quite a bit of detail up already about how this work. Visa, on the other hand, has not done anything like that at all. So that's just FYI for the moment. So why don't we take this, why don't we move on to Q&As, because I know we have a bunch of questions out there. We also want to just mention that you can always go to the FAQs that Rachel showed you earlier. If you have questions, there's really good ones at the creditcardsettlements.ca website. You can call Luciana and her team. You can call us at CFIB if we don't get to your questions, or you still have questions once this is over. Please feel free to do so. But so we'll just sort of run it. So I've been talking now for the last few minutes. Are there any questions, Jocelyn, that you're seeing that I think would be good ones for us to try to address right away, or Rachel?
Yeah, I've seen multiple times what specific documentations will be asked for. Is it your merchant processing statements? Is it bank statements? And what if your processor won't give you the documentation that you need?
Luciana, is that something that you?
No, I was just muted. Like it's the classic problem of the Zoom world, right?
Yes.
I'm assuming that we're talking about the context of the simplified claims form. We're not talking about the documented large merchant claim form. Is that right? Is that what you're looking for? Yeah, so there's flexibility in terms of what information you can provide. I mean, ultimately, they just want some document that will give them the comfort of knowing that, yes, within that massive 21-year period, at one point in time, you had an acquire agreement with someone, and you should be able to either produce a merchant statement that obviously is only provided to you because you were in that relationship, or you should be able to produce an agreement with your acquirer. And there are people that I know will have had multiple acquirers over the class period, and you only need to provide one. You don't need to provide one for every single one that you've had. And if you can't access any document and nobody will help you, then I want you to call me and I'm going to try to solve this problem for you.
So let's just recap. That's really important. You only need to have 1 year as so like one contract for, even if you've been accepting for 10, 12, 15 years of that during that period, as long as you show one contract that you had in that claim period, that'll be enough for simplified claim.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure that that's well understood. So you don't have to worry about the fact if you change providers, because there's quite a few questions on that as well. Like, well, I was with Chase, now I'm with Moneris, or vice versa. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just need one contract for a simplified claim. This is for those that are over 5 million. And then that'll be enough to submit as proof that you were accepting it during those periods. And then, of course, attestation along with that.
Yeah, and just so people are not fiercely feeling like they need to be taking notes of that, I just want to give you the reference that this is found in our FAQs at questions 13 and 14. And 14 specifically talks about the evidence of at least one agreement entered with an acquirer, and but that may include the original agreement, a merchant statement, or other documentary evidence showing the class member paid interchange fees to an acquirer. So we deliberately set this up to create some flexibility and to not be hung up on a specific document at the end of the day.
Okay.
I might just add, there's a couple members who are asking, what if their business has closed during that time period? Can they still apply for the times that they were active during those periods? What if their business was still in business? What should they do?
you can still claim. So unless you were out of business for the totality of the 21 years, right? Then of course you're not a settlement class member. But if you were in operation in any one of the 21 years in play, and you were accepting Visa or MasterCard credit cards or both during that period, you are a class member and you can claim for that period of time in which you were in operation and accepting one or both of the cards.
Okay. Another question that's come up a few times too is, I guess there are a number of merchants who accept US dollar credit cards, or are they still eligible?
That's a good question. I'd have to know more about the card in this situation, but this settlement deals with Canadian interchange. So, and there are class action lawsuits in the US dealing with interchange paid in the United States. So, unless there is some very strange setup where a person has a Canadian card and is paying, I don't think it covers, but I'd have to think about that. So why don't you add that to the list of questions for me?
Okay,
and
so
give you an answer.
We'll do some more digging on that one, and we'll add it to your class action settlement. Brendan has jumped up.
It is only Canadian. I do suspect it is only Canadian interchange that we're dealing with here, and that would not be applicable.
Fair enough. And Brendan has popped up. Brendan, do you have a question?
Yeah, and it's more of an elaboration on the previous question, actually. So does a business currently have to be open and active and running to be able to claim this? For example, we know the pandemic was very tough on a lot of businesses, and they chugged along through it, but maybe they had to close their doors now. Can they still make that claim even though the business has been closed or shut down at this point?
Yes, they can.
Excellent. Simple.
That's right. So yeah, and I think I just want to reiterate, there's a number of questions again around changing of processors. That is not important. It doesn't matter if you change processors, as long as you accepted credit cards, regardless of which processor it was with, you can claim a settlement, right?
Yes, that's right. Like the only area where the change in the processors has an implication is really for the large merchants that are going to be making documented claims, because they're going to have to, they have an option to do a simple process, but if they want to get something more closely related to what they paid, they will have to figure out what they paid in each of the years in which they're claiming. And then obviously it's going to matter because they're going to have to get the information straight from their processors if they don't have that, right? So,
right.
But for the small and medium merchants, that shouldn't matter.
Okay. Jocelyn, I see you and jumped up as well.
Question I've seen a few times is when can businesses expect to see money in their pockets?
Good one.
That's a really good question. So we have to, the claims administrator has to complete the process of assessing all of the claims, because our goal is to exhaust the settlement funds, right? It's going to be a good day if we're able to put all the money that we have in people's pockets and not end up with some residue at the end of the day, which happens sometimes in class actions. So we designed a structure that there is the tallying up of some of the claims and the payment of some of those claims, and then whatever is left over in that notional pot of merchant money, then it's transferred to the next pot. So there's a bit of a cascading effect, but the small and medium merchants should be paid first, I think, under the structure that keeps transferring the pots over. In terms of when they can expect to receive money, I really hesitate to give a prediction, because that can change depending on the volume of material that the claims administrator receives. They have an auditing obligation. They have to be able to make sure that, a certain percentage of the claims they have looked under the hood and they are legit claims and all of that. So if I had to make a guess, I would say by spring of next year, you should be seeing payments, but I don't know. But I can tell you this, I'm a big believer, having done these a number of times. I know that the big problem happens when people submit the claims and then there is no contact and there's a whole bunch of period of time and they don't know what's happening, right? And one of the things that I've asked the claims administrator is to post on the important updates once we update it, to actually say, the claims administrator is now doing X, and we expect that it's going to be until this date, and you should, or we should start seeing payments being made on that date or this date. So make a point of going frequently to the website to see if it has been refreshed, and hopefully we can answer your questions that way.
It's a great point to add. I think I'm seeing a lot of questions, a lot of members saying that they've submitted a claim already, but they're not sure if they did it correctly. They're not sure what's the best way, or what's the best way for them to know if they should correct anything, or if it was submitted.
I think ideally, if there is a problem with a claim, that the claims administrator should be reaching out to the merchant and saying there's a problem, or something is missing, or this and that, right? So, but I'd have to think about that, because I don't want to encourage everyone to call me to find out the status of their claim, because it's going to be very difficult to keep on top of that. But I think there's got to be a system, or maybe there's got to be an email that can be pushed out to class members, sort of like close to the end of the class period, the claims period, to say, we have your claim and it's completed and it's no problem, right? So let me add that to my list of to-dos and try to come up with a notification system and something that makes sense. And it's funny, because I actually think one of these administrators, and they're competitive and they compete for the business, and we did a process here to select the administrator. Nobody has an app yet, and I always think, like, why don't you have an app so that it interacts with people and says, I have your claim, you're missing this information, this is what we're doing. I think that would be fantastic, and I totally hear that as being one of the concerns. So let me add it to my list, and we're going to circle back on that.
Awesome. I have 2 more questions, but I figure, Corinne, you have some questions.
I just wanted to touch on the surcharging, because there's a couple of folks talking about how they know some companies are already surcharging. And I think there's a difference here. There are some organizations that have permission to surcharge. I think someone used WSIB, for example, and that's the Ontario Workers' Compensation Board charges for using credit cards. And there are certain entities that are allowed to surcharge. So just to keep that in mind, but usually like private sector merchants are not. So I just wanted to make that point. And second point I wanted to make is I think there's some people who are concerned about how customers will react and how complicated it might be to surcharge. All of this is optional. It's not something you have to do. It's merely an option that's out there. And I encourage you to think about it, but don't feel you have to rush into it. But it is an option if things become very expensive for you when it comes to getting credit cards. And, you know, both, I think, Luciana and her team, as well as us at CFIB, are happy to sort of walk you through some of the pros and cons and what might work for your business. So I just wanted to make those points as well before we sort of move on. But we have only about a minute or 2 left. So Rachel, if you wanted to add a question, and then we'll do some wrap up.
Yeah, I'm seeing, does GST PST get charged to a surcharge? Thought I would shoot that one to you, Luciana.
I have no idea. So I'm going to have to find that out. I love it. Like, the details are great.
All right, Donna, we will find out and get back to you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's another one about, is the settlement taxable income, which I think it would be. So, yeah.
Yeah, the settlement is basically being treated as an offsetting of what your operating costs in the past year, right? I think that's I mean, you should talk to an accountant who will know more than me on that, but I think that's how it would be treated.
Yeah. All right. Well, Luciana, I think we're just about at the end, and I know we still have many, many other questions outstanding, and I really want to let folks know that if we haven't touched on your question, or you still have questions, you can certainly give us a quick call. We'll put that contact information back up quickly, or I think maybe it was there the whole time. I apologize if it was. But just before we finally close out, I wanted to give a reminder to the CFIB members that we have some upcoming webinars coming as well. These are the ones we have scheduled over the course of the next 6 to 8 weeks. We also have French versions of all of these around the same time. I don't have the exact dates, but that is also going to be coming up. So please look out for them and for the invitation in the mail. We'd love to have you join us. But before we close out, and we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to give you, Luciana, a bit of the last word on anything else you'd like to add to the folks that are listening here today.
Well, this is great. I'm so glad that you put this together. This is a fantastic way to get the word out and to try to answer questions. And this is not a one unique opportunity. So anybody that has questions, as Corinne said, that haven't been answered, and they contact you, Corinne, we will be in touch with you and we will work with you to try to funnel through those questions. And the questions that are bound to come back up again, we are likely going to be updating our own FAQ on the credit card settlement page. So do take a look at that from time to time and see whether it answers your question. And ultimately, if you get any grief over doing this, and I definitely want to know about that, because we work very hard to negotiate these benefits, and we want to make sure that merchants are able to take advantage of the benefits they choose to use.
And I want to thank you, Luciana, for joining us today. I think you were a wealth of information. You provided a lot of good context. And hopefully we were able to answer most of your questions. And I want to thank everybody for joining us as well. We want to just a reminder at CFIB, we're still very much on the credit card issue. I know there were some pre-webinar questions around what's going on with the review of credit card fees. We're still on that with government, trying to get them to continue to find ways to lower those fees overall. So that work will continue. And we want to, again, finally, just thank you again. Thank you, my fellow CFIB folks who helped put this on together, Rachel, Jocelyn, and Brendan, Alexa, Glody. And thank you, of course, for joining us. So with that, we're going to close the webinar.
Thank you.